If we do anything, I might ask you to keep the website up, and I can have you can direct you to some of the things that I think people might, some of the resources that people might find interesting on the website. Is that something you can do with from your screen?
We'll go that after the videos. Exactly. Yep. Well, folks, it is 9:03, and again, welcome. My name is Kevin Darty with the Ag in the Classroom program across the state of Illinois. We're joined today by the Macon County Ag Literacy Coordinator, Jennifer Fink, and Macon County is located in central Illinois, home of Decatur, and they are the soybean capital of the world. Following up on our History Week, we're also joined by Laura Yar. She's the director of the Staley Museum and also the Mueller Museum in Decatur. So we're really excited to be joined by them and talk a little bit about agriculture and history. Remember, if you joined me on Tuesday, we talked about all of those local connections that we have, and this is a really unique example of what Staley does and what the Staley and Mueller connections mean to Decatur and central Illinois, but not only central Illinois, across the state and around the nation and around the world. So we're really excited about that. And first, I'd like to have Laura, if you'd just like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you, your background, and Staley, the Staley Museum, before we actually watch the highlight video of the Staley Museum. So welcome, Laura.
Well, thank you, everyone who's out there listening and taking the time in their morning to be here with us. It's wonderful to see people taking an interest in local history in all of its different aspects. And these stories for Decatur definitely have a multitude of aspects. I am a graduate of the University of Illinois. I graduated with a degree in art history and another degree in Spanish language. I lived for a little over 30 years in Madrid, Spain, but I'm originally from Decatur. 10 years ago, I came back to Decatur and got in the museum world here and the local history. And I've been working in that. I started out at the Mueller Museum, and around 2013, the Staleys decided they wanted to work on a museum that tells the Staley story. And I was able to step into that position pretty easily because of the overlap between the two families. There were marriages between these. There's a lot of common ground, and also contribution to Decatur, although the Mueller story is more of an industrial story, while the Staley story is more of an ag story. They're both, for us, founding father stories for the Decatur community, as well as American dream stories. In fact, I think the American dream story is really an interesting angle to these stories, especially in these days that we're living now. On the side of the Mueller company, Hieronymus Mueller was an immigrant from Germany during those great waves of immigration in the 1850s, when people were coming to populate during westward expansion. So he's got that immigrant side of the American dream story, where Staley is kind of homegrown from North Carolina, from a small family farm. Things, it's kind of yourself up by your own bootstraps, perseverance and hard work. So he is the American version of that American dream. So we've got two American dream stories going here, as well as founding father stories for the community of Decatur.
Very cool. Didn't like the connection. You've actually seen the world and came back to Decatur. So let's get started first to give folks a general overview of what goes on in Decatur in the Staley Museum. I'm going to play the video to show that. So we'll get started with that. Let me see if I can see this, and we'll go here. This is our Staley Museum story. This is the history of the Staley Museum. Lauren, I'm going to rely on you. You should be able to see the Staley slide, the YouTube video. Just nod your head yes if you see that on the screen.
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to play that in just a second here. I'm going to expand to full screen. And here we go, folks. Here's the history of the Staley Museum.
Welcome to the Staley Museum, located at 361 North College Street in Decatur. A.E. Staley was a big man with big dreams. Staley's dreams, together with his civic-minded generosity, contributed in major ways to Decatur of today. Many of the city's landmarks are a result of his efforts, and A.E.'s pioneering vision of the cultivation and processing of soybeans gave Decatur the name the soybean capital of the world. At the Staley Museum, you'll find out more about Staley's products. For instance, in 1902, Staley trademarked cream cornstarch as his first product. Later, the Staley Company produced a variety of syrups and laundry products that further solidified the Staley name as a quality brand. Eventually, Staley became a major producer of high fructose corn syrup and sweetos. In addition to corn products, Staley pioneered the production and processing of soybeans, finding uses in food products and animal feeds. You'll also find out about the history of the Decatur Staleys. As a lifelong sports fan, A.E. Staley gave his full support and financial backing to organize a football team in 1919. Staley hired George Hallis to take the team to the next level. And with Staley's blessing, Hallis later moved the Decatur Staleys to Chicago, where the team would become the Chicago Bears and a founding member of the NFL. You'll also learn more about the iconic Staley office building, one of Decatur's grandest and recognizable structures. Designed with the highest level of artistic and architectural qualities, the building has often been referred to as the Castle in the Cornfields. Also learn about Staley's connection to another Decatur company, the Mueller Company. Two of Decatur's founding families were actually united by two marriages. The connection between the families has forever linked the Staley Museum and our sister museum, the Hieronymus Mueller Museum. Also learn about A.E. Staley's legacy. His vision for the company led him to become an active voice for developments in the community, a driving force in the creation of Lake Decatur, the Staley Pump House, the Staley Viaduct, and the downtown Masonic Temple. In other words, what's good for Staley is good for Decatur. Learn more at the Staley Museum at 361 North College Street in Decatur. Find us online at staleymuseum.com or visit us on Facebook.
Well, there we go. And I didn't do that. I got to start sharing my screen again because I forgot to hit pause. So I've learned that. All right. So we don't necessarily want to see that video. So we'll stop the share. There we go. Laura, just describe us as we walk through the museum and share a little bit of Staley history that you think is important for everyone to know. We talked earlier before people got on about some people might be drawn to the story of the Bears, but there's so much more than just the Bears. And if you got comments, put them in the chat box. We'll get to the Bears in a little bit. I do want to tempt you about that. That is important. But Laura, share with us some other Staley highlights that you think are important for folks to know around the state and also in your backyard.
Well, it's a very big story. It touches on a lot of different things. Here at the museum, you know, we're always looking for ways to connect our story to the bigger picture, because when we connect to the bigger picture, more people can relate to that story and connect the dots. So we've got different moments in time. There's the early era of Staley's life, which is kind of the precursor or sets the foundation for what we will call that American dream story, where he is raised in rural North Carolina on a small family farm. He's born in 1867, which means he is born just after the American Civil War. So he's going to grow up in the Reconstruction era of the South, and his family will struggle to make ends meet. By the time he's 18, his father will have passed away. And in those early teen years is when he discovers that he would like to be a businessman. He's worked on the farm his whole childhood, and he didn't have very great tasks growing up as a child. His recollection growing up on the farm is having to walk the tobacco fields and pick the tobacco worms off the plants so that they wouldn't damage the plants. And I think that kind of scarred him for life, because he said, I want to get out of the field, I want to be a business. And so his first taste of that opportunity, the first opportunity he had for that was in his early teens. He was allowed to take the surplus of their garden crop to the farmer's market in the nearby town. And that was where he first got his opportunity to test being a salesman, meeting with people in the community and selling a product. And that is where he's going to then take off and interview and get jobs with other small businesses or that are providing products to grocers around the nation. He'll have different territories over time. In 1898, his territory will be Illinois and Wisconsin. And when he comes through Illinois, a couple different things happen. He sees this home that then will eventually become his home. And he looks at this house as he's going through Decatur, Illinois, and he watches what's going on at this house, and he says, someday, you know, I'm going to have a home like that. And little did he know that he would end up coming back to Decatur and establishing himself as a business and actually own this home. So he was familiar with this home and with Decatur before he ever came here to start his business. In that time frame, he will also meet his wife, Emma Tressler, in Chicago. She was a pianist and she was performing. He saw her performance and fell in love with her, and then they started dating and they got married. Why does that matter? Well, Emma is going to be a motivating force for Staley throughout his life. She will give him her best. She will give him her best advice. She will support him unconditionally and encourage him to, when the time comes, to launch into business for himself and that's how he will end up coming to Decatur. Emma's family was a banking family in Baltimore, Maryland. So between the support that he had from his growing number of loyal customers, his customer base, and his wife and her family pushing him in the direction, he'll decide to launch into manufacturing, and that's how he'll come to Decatur. But what makes the Staley story an important story for Decatur is, or just in general, not even just for Decatur, is probably, in my opinion, the soybean story. Staley will come to Decatur and he'll start with starch and corn, and he'll be very successful with that. Even despite the eras, he'll have to flow with the ups and downs of the economical eras at different times, and there will be rough spots along the way. But he will find his way through those because he is a man that has big dreams and has the Midas touch. Really, when he decides to go for something, he's kind of a make it happen kind of guy. But the soybean story is, I think, particularly important because it's what really put us on the map and what, in my opinion, changed agriculture entirely. Before soybeans, you know, farmers were in general planting corn. They may have been planting, at least in this area, they may have planted other things as well, but the whole concept of crop rotation came about with the addition of soybeans into the farming market. And that somebody needed to take that bull by the horn, and Staley was that person. He was already familiar with the soybeans childhood. Carolina, North Carolina in the early 1900s was already planting soybeans and having a relatively successful market down there. So having come from that area, he was already familiar with soybeans. But there were also people in this area that were interested in the soybeans because they were familiar with the way it benefited the soil and the nutritional benefits of the soybean. And so Staley joined forces with the University of Illinois Agricultural School, and they decided that they were going to educate farmers about soybeans and going to try to produce. They were going to try to force this, or not force, but they were going to try to promote this new plant and this new crop into farming. For that to happen, for farmers to be willing to even take the risk, because who's going to take the risk with such an unknown variable, Staley had to promise farmers that he would buy their beans if they planted them. And then after he bought those beans, he needed to guarantee to those farmers that there would be a market for them. And so he essentially started the market for animal feed. He started with animal feed because really the American palate wasn't ready to take on soybeans on their own dinner table yet. And that really wouldn't happen. The American public really wouldn't open their mind to soybeans until World War II. And World War II, because of the shortages that existed at that time, people were willing to try things that previously they'd kind of turned their nose up to and weren't ready to try. But World War II and the shortages and with everything going to the soldiers, to the boys overseas, the people at home become creative. They had to plant their own gardens and things like that. And one of the things that they opened their mind to were products made from soybeans. But after Staley was able to get the animal feed started, he had a guaranteed market, and he was able to move that endeavor forward. They created a train called the Soybean Special, and that was a combined partnership between the University of Illinois and the Illinois Central Railroad and Staley Manufacturing Company. It was a 6-car train, and it traveled all over the state of Illinois and stopped in different places, in different communities, and educated farmers about soybeans. There was an exhibit car that showed the different varieties of soybeans. There was a lecture car where people that were specialized in the field could give lectures to farmers about the benefits of planting soybeans and the crop rotation, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was also a film car where they could actually show films. This was all taking place in the 1920s. So Staley really changed agriculture, just willing to take the chance. It's not that maybe he was the only person doing it or that other people weren't interested. Obviously, nothing happens that quickly, or that it's not from day one to day two. It's a process. But Staley was really the first person, the first manufacturer to step forward and say, I'm going to make an investment here. I'm going to make an investment, a financial investment in my business to provide the equipment necessary to do this. I'm going to buy your beans, and I'm going to find a market for those beans. And in that sense, he is the pioneer of the soybean.
Wow. So it's like we paid her to do this, folks. And honestly, I will tell you that we've had limited emails on this. And I said, hey, we're going to show this video, and you want to talk about some Staley history. Folks, there's your soybean lesson for the day. I think you've all just realized and seen how you wanted history and agriculture. You just got it right there. So I think that's fascinating. Thank you, Laura. One question I had, and as we watched the video, a couple of key dates popped out to me. 1919, Staley is beginning to the Lake Decatur. They actually formed a lake. There's a dam, and they make a lake. And 1918 is the site of the Great Pandemic. So he's doing this work during the first pandemic. And then secondly, he builds the big, beautiful Staley office building, and it opens in 1930. There's a picture of that behind you. And as we all know, history-wise, that's the Great Depression as well. So as a businessman and agriculturalist in the Decatur area, he lived through two major historic events. I just did give Laura just a heads up and say, hey, I'm going to ask about this. But can you talk a little bit about Staley and those two eras of time? What happened in Decatur and what happened with Staley between 1918 and the Great Depression?
Well, that is a very key part of our story here at the Staley Museum. In fact, it's so key that when I speak to groups about it, we refer to it as Staley's prolific decade. Staley had major achievements in that decade, and that is where, and that decade definitely is the overlap of industrial or agricultural endeavor meeting with community and partnering and making some really big things happen. What do I mean by that? Well, let me just start out first of all with the pandemic issue. We don't really have information regarding Staley and that particular pandemic. There isn't a lot written about it. There may be some sporadic newspapers, but Staley as a manufacturing company wasn't as affected by some of the things that affected other groups of industry, primarily because they were a food industry. And food industries survive in those areas because it's an essential, it's needed by the community. Well, they weren't just food. I mean, starch is used in a lot of different ways. But so the pandemic, there isn't, in my mind, at present time, a direct correlation with the Staley story in the pandemic, other than the fact that there may have been some people in his business, but it's not documented anywhere. There may have been some employees that came down with it. Decatur, as a community, was struck by the pandemic, and the pandemic did motivate our community to grow our hospital system. We didn't have enough beds at the time, and some of our historic homes were actually turned into annexes for the hospital, and that was a big motivation to get people to donate and grow the hospital. So our hospital really did, Decatur Memorial Hospital really did grow out of the need discovered during the pandemic. But as far as Staley's concerned, let's talk about that prolific decade, because it is such a key factor. I'll try to go year by year. So 1919, several things happened. To begin with, a group, Staley promoted a group to develop in the company. It was called the Staley Fellowship Club. And the Staley Fellowship Club is going to be a support to Staley employees. Staley employees have the choice to belong to the Fellowship Club. Dues were minimal, maybe like $1 a year or something like that. So dues were minimal, but the Fellowship Club was going to be a group. It was going to promote the well-being of Staley employees. And I could talk to you for a whole hour about the Fellowship Club. So I won't be able to talk. I won't do that because there's too many other things to talk to you about. But the Fellowship Club to be key for the well-being of Staley employees, whether it's during hard times or illness, or in the promotion of in promoting education and entertainment and things like that. So let's just hold on to the Staley Fellowship Club being founded in 1919. That's the same year that the football program was founded, and that football program spun out of the Fellowship Club. Sports is going to be good for the employees. It's going to be an entertainment in a community where there isn't much entertainment. It's going to be good sportsmanship, which is going to be good for employees in the workplace. It's going to be an entertainment. So football comes, they already had baseball, and football is going to come out of that because there is a new interest in the country for football, which at this point are primarily industrial teams playing one another. And there's no formal league. There's barely any formal rules and regulations for the game as a whole. So it's going to be a little bit of a struggle, but Staley jumps on board with that because he's promoted this fellowship club, and he thinks it's going to be a good thing for his employees. And he also sees it as a unique and new way to promote his company by having them go and play games in other areas of the states and other places. He'll get the Staley name out through his football team. So the football team starts in 1919 also. We'll talk more about the football team later, but I'm just outlining the prolific decade right now. So 1919 football club and the Staley Fellowship Club. Also in 1919, Decatur is starting to look at the possibility of a lake. The lake is needed for Decatur on a multitude of levels. Decatur is a growing community, the junction of two railroads. Lots of industry is being attracted to Decatur, and water is needed for all kinds of industry, but definitely Staley. Staley literally needed billions of gallons of water at his disposal for his corn milling and then later soybeans. For his milling process, he needed that water. And Staley already knew in 1919 that he was gearing up to start promoting soybeans. So he needed to have that guaranteed water source. I say that Staley is solely responsible for creating Lake Decatur. That wouldn't be true. There were other people that saw the value in that. But Staley's definitely in a position to move that project forward. He told the city of Decatur that if they could not guarantee a water source for him, he was going to have to move his business elsewhere. And of course, the city didn't want to lose the Staley Manufacturing Company. And so that was a motivation to get the ball rolling. In 1919, that same year, the city of Decatur gave Staley permission to make a provisional dam. It was called the Staley Dam on the Sangamon River, and to create the pump house. And the concept of the pump house and the dam was to move that water to the Staley Manufacturing Company in the interim time while the rest of the lake was being built. And the lake won't be inaugurated until 1922. So there were several years that dam and that pump house were vital to getting that water to the Staley Manufacturing Company. The pump house would go on to continue important, but the Staley Dam will eventually come down once Decatur has its own dam. Then in 1922, Staley officially starts processing soybeans. He's done the groundwork, he's starting processing soybeans, and after he starts getting that soybean processing started, that train that I told you about will go on the road and continue to motivate farmers to join the rotation of soybeans and corn, 2 cash crops instead of 1, with soybeans putting all those nutrients and back into the soil that corn takes out. So he's really making a sales pitch there. Staley, if nothing else, is a salesman, and that's what he said he wanted to be, and that's what he's going to be. So in 1922, he starts processing soybeans. Then in 1928, his business has grown so much. His business and the Wabash Railroad grown so much that their joint campuses, which are side by side here in Decatur, have become an obstacle for the growing community to be able to safely cross. So Staley again finds himself in a unique position to project forward. They decide that the city of Decatur combines with the Staley Manufacturing Company and the Wabash Railroad to decide how they can make a safe crossing over these 2 industrial campuses. They contemplate several ideas, from an underground tunnel, but they eventually land on the viaduct that crosses over the two campuses, because financially it's going to be the easiest project to carry on. How does Staley contribute? Well, this viaduct is going to be paid for by 3 parties: the Staley Manufacturing Company, the Wabash Railroad, and the city and township of Decatur. Staley already knew he could guarantee 1/3 of the cost of the project, but he was also on the board of directors for the Wabash Railroad. So he was able to guarantee that 1/3 of or not necessarily guarantee, but definitely motivate the Wabash Railroad to participate in that too. Staley had a very close relationship with the railroad from the time he was a traveling salesman all the way through his lifetime. The Staley Viaduct became a reality because of Staley's ability to motivate and push projects through. Then Staley was a Mason, and so he was very at the temple here in Decatur. The temple is just literally down the street from the location of the Staley Museum, which was his home. And so he will be the single large individual donor to the building fund for the temple. Now that's interesting in and of itself, but for our story, for the Staley story, the temple is the foreground or the exploration for what will then become the Staley office building. The temple is structurally is very similar. Construction people that worked on the temple then also worked on the Staley office building. So Staley is watching the temple being built. He's participating in the building project of the Masonic Temple, and he's calculating in his mind what he's going to do with his own office building. And so that happens. The temple is under construction in 1928 and opened in 1929. Staley will start construction on his office building in 1929 and open in 1930. So here we've got the Staley Fellowship Club, the creation of the football program, the pump house and Lake Decatur, the viaduct, the Masonic Temple, and the Staley office building, all in a 10-year span. Now, I don't know. I think about how long it takes me to get a project done, and I think it blows my mind to think of all the stuff that he got done. In addition to running his business, he still had his business in Baltimore, Maryland, as well, and creating that train and educating farmers and being a member of his community. So it really was, and being on the board of directors of the railroad, it really was an amazing time for A.E. Staley and his company and the contributions they made to Decatur, the community.
And
so
those landmarks still stand today.
Yes,
The Staley headquarters, the viaduct, the temple, all of those things, they really changed the face of Decatur. For those of you who haven't been, I know we're just opening back up. It's totally worth the day trip to see some of those things. So if you've got a hankering to travel somewhere, Macon County would love to host you and see some of those corn and soybean fields on the way. And for our teachers, just to reflect back again, here we got the soybean stuff, but also that aspect of soil and soil fertility. That goes back to Chris's explanation of that three-legged stool of sustainability between economics and the environment and the community. A.E. Staley really represents all of those. So, and as a salesman, he knew how to pitch it. So
he did, and he had the Midas touch. Here's the thing about Staley. He had very little formal education. That's another important factor to an American dream story. You start out with very little, whether it's financial or whatever, and you know how to use your resources to make something big happen. The components of American dream story is you have little to build on, and you build on it through hard work, perseverance, and generally your dream ends up benefiting others beyond yourself. And so Staley definitely fits into that category. He had very little formal education, but he was a man that knew how to use his resources. He knew how to look for the people that had the best information and the best answers, and to utilize their knowledge to further his project. But as far as education goes, Kevin, I wonder, could we go to the Staley site for a minute?
yes.
I'd like to show you, since so many of you are teachers, I'd like to show you some educational resources that have just been put up on our website that are free to use. Show you a couple things on our website that you might find useful or interesting as you, if you're going to talk about history or Decatur history or Illinois history, you might find some of this information useful. Okay,
There you go.
Kevin, could you go to the resources tab and hit that arrow?
Resources arrow right there. Yes.
And then down to education.
Perfect.
We're going to be adding more to this. Right now we have what we call our Unit 1, which is scroll down a little bit and hit that first era down at the bottom, and it says first era.
Yep. Wow. Okay.
Over here. There you go. So this is printer friendly. You can print it off and then adapt any of the information. We did not gear it towards any particular age group because that would just be difficult to hit all of the different age groups. But we figured that teachers can print off this information and use it. And if you scroll through slowly, Kevin, you'll be able to see that we touch on a little bit of everything that pertains to Staley Sr. Who was Mr. Staley, his childhood, where he grew up, the soybean story, how he becomes familiar with the soybean, becoming a salesman.
Wow, and even baking powder. Yep.
So if you go, you can scroll through this, and you will have a very good understanding of Mr. Staley as we tell the story here at the museum. And you can, and teachers can, print this out and utilize this information, create whatever kind of unit they'd like to. We kept it without too much color, specifically to make it printer friendly to teachers and not having to, take off your ink cartridge to print off the information. So all of that is there for teachers. And if you could go back to the website for just a minute.
Yep.
Another thing that scholars, if you could go up to the Staley Library.
Staley, sorry, Staley Library. I'm not seeing that.
At the end, let's
Staley
see,
Journal.
I can't see it.
I've
There
got
you go, Staley Journal.
Staley Journal, yep. Oh, there we go. Yep, the online library, yes.
So the Staley Journal, for those that are interested in the Staley story, it starts, you see the first title, it starts with the Staley Fellowship Club. It will change names a couple times, and then it will eventually land Staley Journal. It's published from 1917, which is the first issues, through past World War II in the 50s and early 60s. Then it kind of disappears and becomes a different kind of internal publication called the Staley News, and its whole mission kind of changes. But the Staley Journal on our website is searchable. So you see up there that you have a search.
Right.
You can type in. Well, it looks like you've typed in a few things.
Yeah.
Just type in soybeans and then hit go.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did it too quick. Soybeans.
And you'll see that it will search all of those journals, and it will bring up all of the articles pertaining to soybeans. You can look for people there. If you have a family member that worked for Staley and you want to find out if they're mentioned anywhere in the journal, the only thing with family members is you want to definitely remember to use quotation marks. Like if you want to look up John Smith, do quotation marks, John Smith, quotation marks, because otherwise the search engine will bring up all the Johns and all the Smiths.
Okay.
You want John Smith. So those are just resources that are there for you.
So folks, say hello to your primary source information right here. So on soybeans, on all of that. Can you touch quickly, Laura, on the Staley and the Mueller connection?
Yes. Well, Mueller has been indicator much longer. It actually was here for about 50 years longer than before Staley came here. So Mueller goes back to 1857, where Staley came to Decatur, really 1912. So just about 50 years difference there. Mueller is a water and gas company. They produce machinery and connection pieces for the water and gas industry. One of their major components today that people are most familiar with is our fire hydrants. They produce a lot more many other products besides fire hydrants, but fire hydrants are what everybody knows. Their product below ground, where the fire hydrants are visible and above ground. They produce over 50% of the nation's fire hydrants currently, and they started out here in Decatur as a family-owned business with Hieronymus Mueller. By the time Staley comes to Decatur, Hieronymus Mueller, the founder, has already passed away. So Staley is a contemporary with what we call the first generation of Mueller descendants. And there were 6 sons and 1 daughter. They all lived here in Decatur. And for the most part, were all actively involved in the company. The daughter, to a lesser extent, simply because she was a woman and women didn't do those things at the time. Although she did have a seat on the board eventually. So they were contemporaries, and they were going to be moving in the same circles. This was the society page for the Decatur community in the early 1900s. Staley Jr. will marry the eldest daughter of the eldest son of the founder of the Mueller Company. So the founder of the Mueller Company was Hieronymus Mueller. His eldest son was Henry Mueller, and Henry Mueller's eldest daughter, Lenore, will marry A.E. Staley Jr. in 1926. Now, prior to that, in 1924, there was another marriage between Muellers and Staleys. Staley's daughter, Ruth, married another Staley son, or a grandson, Ebert Mueller, and they did not have a very successful go of things. Their marriage only lasted a few years, and then they divorced. They had 1 child, their child will become a pianist, like Emma had been a pianist. Marriage really didn't move or shake the community like the marriage between A.E. Staley Jr. and Lenore Mueller did. That was, for Decatur in September of 1926, the big society wedding. That was like a wedding between the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts, as far as the Decatur community was concerned. And so they were married, and their marriage lasted quite a long time. It didn't last forever, but it lasted through World War II. Then they separated and got divorced, but they had 3 children. And so those children and the descendants of those children are both Mueller and Staley's. And in fact, the branch of the family has promoted the opening of the Staley Museum is that branch, that Mueller-Staley branch, that shared history. So Mark Staley, Mark and Julie Staley, who are the primary family motivators, or at least initially were the motivators for the Staley Museum. Mark is both Staley and Mueller descendant, and he's on both boards, actually. So that's where the connection. Then, of course, living in a small community like the two families will overlap. Many of the things that you'll see in one business, you'll see in the other. For example, a Mueller company had the Mueller Record, which was their internal publication. It started in 1911. Then we have the Staley Journal in 1917 start at the Staley Company. The Staley had the Fellowship Club, and Mueller started early in the late 1800s with the Mutual Benefit Association, which was played the same role in the Mueller Company. The fact that these two businesses were family-run businesses really structured the way the companies viewed their employees and provided for their employees. The fact that a mutual benefit association or a fellowship club exists is primarily due to the fact that these companies saw their employees as a parcel of their family, the larger Staley family or the larger Mueller family. And Mueller, simply because they started earlier, we discuss Hieronymus Mueller's relationship with his employees as a paternalistic relationship. Hieronymus Mueller and his wife Frederica were very much like parents to their employees, which sounds a little bit condescending, but it's not meant to be that way. You have to understand that the early years of the Mueller Company, many of the early employees of the company were immigrants, like Hieronymus and Frederica were both immigrants. And so Hieronymus and Frederica, what they provided was leadership for these employees that have recently come to the country. They helped them get started. They helped them have a job. They helped them have a purpose. Then they founded they wanted them to be homeowners. So a credit union, it wasn't called a credit union in the beginning, but a credit union was set up so that they could become homeowners. And then in the case of both companies, lyceums, and if you're familiar with the word lyceum, you know that in the mid 1800s, lyceums were generally educational presentations specifically geared towards adults to expand their knowledge. They could be political presentations, literary presentations, entertainment, or whatever. So people like Mark Twain were on the lyceum circuit. It was very popular in the mid 1800s. As you move into the 1900s, the lyceum circuit becomes more an entertainment versus an educational thing, and both companies sponsored lyceums with entertainment opportunities and educational opportunities for their employees. So you can see that the desire to create well-being for their employees is important to both of these companies, and that has repercussions and benefits to the community at large, because these employees are reaping the benefits of working for these really wonderful companies, and at the same time going out into their community and feeling, when you receive, you feel like you can give, and that's really how the employees will be make incredible contributions in the community in diverse ways. And I'm not trying to say that that's because of what they received in the business world. I'm just saying that it's all one big ball. If you're a happy person when you enjoy the place that you go to work, and you feel like you're supported, somebody's got your back. In the case of Staley, let me just kind of spin off. You had asked about the Depression years, and I can think of one particular example where the Staley company was really had the backs of their employees at that time. And it's also an area for the office, before the office building was built, and then after the office building was built, there was a large area of land to the east of the office building, and the research and development lab is there now. But in the 20s and 30s, it was a large field area, and the Fellowship Club was allowed to parcel that area out for personal gardens for the employees. So the Fellowship Club would till that ground, and then the employees could come in, and anyone that wanted to have a parcel there and have a garden could have a garden plot there. Now, that in the 30s, during the Depression years, that will be vital to sustaining Staley families. Those gardens will put food on their table in ways that, you know, when there are shortages elsewhere, they'll have you know, access to fresh vegetables during the Depression years. Staley also did he also provided a shop. He bought canned foods in bulk quantity to make them available to Staley employees at cost, so that people wouldn't be going hungry during the Depression years. Those same gardens, after the Depression years, when we move into World War II, those same gardens will change names, and instead of being Depression gardens, they will be called Victory Gardens. Victory Gardens being, they meet the same need. During World War II, there are shortages, there's rationing, people need to supplement their home, and they can do it through these garden plots that they have available to them on the Staley land. And I think that really kind of stems directly from Staley's own personal upbringing. He grew up in Reconstruction, in the Reconstruction era of the South. His family were not large plantation farmers. They were a small family farm. They had two crops: a family garden that then they for their own sustenance, that then they took the surplus and sold at the farmer's market, and then they had their cash crop, which was tobacco. And so Staley understood, you know, shortages. He understood what it felt like to struggle. He knew that, and so he tried to make life easier for his employees based on his own experience from childhood. So that's an example of getting through the Depression years, and then the war, and then even the war years.
Right. And again, as we've talked, there is so much to Staley, but one, those teachers are always looking for that hook. And how did agriculture, how did industry, how did it have a start in some of the popular culture things? Laura, I want to share the brief video. It's a beautifully well done video of the Chicago Bears, the Staley Bears. We'll talk about the Staley Bears, and I'll go to this. And if you would, folks, if you'll give me a second here, and we'll take a look at the Decatur Staleys.
100 years ago, the Decatur Staleys started their winning inaugural season in red jerseys and tan pants. They then went to Chicago, changed their name, and changed their colors. The Chicago Cardinals were already red, so the Chicago Staleys came out with blue and orange for George Halas's alma mater, the University of Illinois.
Decatur is the birthplace of the Bears. We're mindful of that, and we're grateful for that.
So again, I got to go back to share my screen, because otherwise we're going to get live stream coverage of NBC News here. We don't want that.
The two most common reasons people go to see.
So here we go. And we'll stop that share and go here. Laura, the Bears. Let's just talk about the Decatur Staleys in football and what you have at the museum there, briefly.
Let's talk about the Bears. The football team started in 1919. We have a room that's dedicated to that story. Well, we have some other things in there as well pertaining to some of the other sports and programs at the company at that time. But primarily, it's the Bears room. The room given at the museum is what was considered Staley's office when he lived here at the time. And the house lore is that is the room that Staley and Hollis would meet in to discuss the football program and things like that. To the extent that's true, we don't actually know. I do know that there were also a lot of meetings that took place in the office building and and on Staley Field. A lot of the meetings took place in those places. But the Staley office here at the house is the room that discusses the football program. And I think the thing that you have to realize is they started out playing as the Decatur Staleys in 1919. Then what ended up happening was, as I told you, it was an industrial team. And in order to play on the team, you had to be an employee at the Staley Manufacturing Company. That was really the one criteria for being on the team. But what happened was the Staleys were scheduled to play a game over in Arcola. Arthur Arcola had their own industrial team. It was put together by the businessmen over there. And the Decatur Staleys were scheduled to go over there and play that game. They got word the Arcola businessmen were recruiting players outside of the community to come and play on their team. And so Staley, he's got a big ego. You have to have a big ego to achieve all of the things that he achieved during his lifetime. And he was not going to send his football team in to be humiliated or embarrassed by playing against people that were not that were professional or had more experience in the game. So that particular game that the Staleys didn't go to has gone down in history as the game that was never played. And the Arcola High School has a Wall Dogs mural that commemorates the game that was never played. That really is what's going to start Staley thinking about bringing in players of his own and recruiting players, something that they hadn't considered in that time. But Staley is always a man that thinks about what's fair. So he decides that he's going to find a new coach for his team. And that's how he ends up reaching out to George Hollis. George Hollis has not only in the football arena, but also in the arena of baseball. And so he wants to bring George Hollis on board to captain his football team and coach his football team, but also play baseball for his baseball team. So kill two birds with one. And he wants to allow George Hollis to go out and bring some additional players on board for the Staley team, with the understanding that those players will also have to work at the company, because that was one of the rules. So George Hollis agrees that he'll do this. This story is obviously much larger and much more complex than when I'm giving you the nut version. He agrees that he'll do this, but he says that his players need to have at least 2 hours a day to practice. So all of the men that he goes out and recruits and brings back to play on the Staley team will work at Staley in some capacity. They'll be given jobs in the Staley Manufacturing Company, and they will have 2 hours a day to practice on field with George Hollis. George Hollis requires this because he's got a reputation to protect. He's not going to field a team that he hasn't even had a chance to work with or have practices. So in a nutshell, that's what happens. George Hollis, that first 1919 season is just the Decatur Staley's industrial team. And then Hollis is brought aboard in the summer of 1920, and the 1920 season is their one and only season in Decatur. A lot of people don't realize that. But they had one 1920 in Decatur, by which they claimed they were champions of that season. There's some questions about whether they entered, primarily because there weren't rules and regulations for the game yet. And so determining which games counted and which games didn't count to declare yourself champions was one of the glitches. But they had a winning season and they declared themselves champions that year. And so they had really built a name and they'd built a following for their team. So by night, Staley is confronting a couple different issues. Mr. Staley's confronting one, that the football team is costing him a lot of money. Okay, it's the travel and the equipment and the insurance and all of the components that go into having a football team and traveling is costing him a lot of money. Not only that, after they declared themselves champions, the players wanted more money. They felt that they had earned a boost in their income. Well, that was going to be difficult because the way the players were paid they were paid a salary for being Staley employees, but they were given a share of the gate intake, and that was their football salary, so to speak. Well, the problem is Staley Field only had a capacity of 1,500 people. There was no way to grow that or amplify that without a major investment into the football program. So there was no way to increase that gate intake because without building another field, they wouldn't be able to increase the number of visitors or fans that would come to the field. So that was one problem. The second problem came from Staley's employees themselves. There was a lot of grumbling amongst the employees at the company of the preferential treatment that the football players were getting. And so Staley really had to come to make a decision. He had to decide whether he was going to own a professional football team or if he was going to run his company. And he obviously, now today we know what his choice was. He was loyal to his employees. Now there are some other things that went along with it. George Hollis and Dutch Sterneman were already looking at wanting to have ownership of the team themselves anyway. And Staley may have felt a little salty about that, but at the same time, he was wishy-washy about whether he wanted to delve into that arena of professional sports full-hearted anyway. And his dedication to his play, I think, was the swaying factor of him eventually releasing the team and sending them off to Chicago with his blessing. He paid them $5,000 to cover the first year in Chicago at Wrigley Field. And during that first year, instead of calling themselves the Decatur Staleys, they called themselves the Chicago Staleys. And that was a good marketing move for Staley because in the Chicago, they were going to have maybe 10,000 fans at the field. And so a lot of people were going to become familiar with the Staley name just by going and watching the football games. So that was a good turn for Staley. But he eventually let them go so that he could focus on his business. He always said he wanted to be a businessman. A lot of people depended on him to earn their living, and you know, he just wasn't going to give that up to own a professional team. Besides that, if when you look back at football history, football was just in its taking baby steps at that time. It's not the dollar business, wasn't the $1 billion business then that it's turned into now. So anyway, that's the Staley story. And we have a room, we have some artifacts. There are not a lot of artifacts from that era, just because it wasn't the business that it is today. So, but we do have some artifacts, and we tell the story more fully and more completely. So if you're interested in that, you should definitely stop by and visit the athletic room.
Right. And Laura, we are getting close to time here. We're right at time, but for you teachers, just one other little fact. The actual mascot that you see prancing around down on the football field, his name is Staley The Bears.
The
So
Bears.
there's still that connection there. So take that back to your students as well. I do want to bring on Jennifer Fink, who has taken several teachers on teacher tours to the Staley Museum. And Jennifer, could you give us one highlight that maybe Laura hasn't covered, or just reinforce one part of the Staley story that you see and your teachers are always enchanted by?
Yeah, oftentimes the groups that I've brought in are teachers that have been familiar with Ag in the Classroom. Either they have received materials from us, most likely they have invited us into their classroom for classroom presentations with their students. But it still is so surprising and interesting and fun for me to see when we're in the museum, we're taking the tour, all of the light bulbs going off. You know, we are sitting here in what we've called the soybean capital of the world, and oftentimes they do not still understand what surrounds them here every day. And their spouse, their parents, their children, loved ones are working, you know, at Tate Lyle, or they're working for ADM, but they are still putting all of the connections together to see what all of these end products are. And they're amazed at how many, like Laura touched on and you showed on the website, all of the different thousands of products that these materials and goods end up in every day, and they have for decades now, that they have come right here from Decatur. They get so excited about that. And, you know, the upstairs is really interesting if you do get to take a chance to take the tour in person someday. It has a lot of the family memorabilia. A lot of our teachers really took to that, and they got to see old wedding albums, different outfits, clothing, and just a little more of a personal aspect. So definitely the business and the end products, and then also seeing that kind of personal side of the family, I would say was intriguing for them as well.
Right. We do have a question on the chat asking about a virtual tour of the Staley Museum. Laura shared with us earlier, there isn't. When we first started this, when we first started the shutdown, this was supposed to be a 2-week venture. This was supposed to be, you know, we didn't know. So right now there isn't a virtual tour of the Staley Museum. However, I think that some of the materials on their website and using primary sources are there. One thing I really want to encourage you teachers to do is, as local and regional museums are opening up, schedule your own. You want to go somewhere, take some pictures off your phone, put them together. There's all sorts of agriculture at the local level, and then reinforce it with the Staley stuff. They've got great stuff on their website, but right now there isn't. And we will be posting some of the virtual tours that we find that are related to agriculture on our website. I know we're a little over, but it's been a fascinating story.
Kevin?
I will post the information on the Staley Museum on our blog, beyondthebarndoor.wordpress.com, with all that information. And again, I've got several books all about soybeans, and I also included a couple of videos about soybean processing, that process that A.E. Staley would have taken and how it's been refined for you, and links to that on the Illinois soybean website. You'll find those on the blog as well. Laura, you wanted to add something there?
I do. You mentioned the virtual tour. One of the reasons we don't have a virtual tour right now of the museum is because a lot of energy is being put into creating, there's a film that's going to be coming out called Fields of Gold. And it is the A.E. Staley story. It's in production right now. It's expected to be released next year in 2021. It will be I'm not exactly sure where all it's going to be released at. I think PBS possibly is taking an interest in it, but I don't really know the details on that. I might be wrong about that. So what I can tell you is eventually there will be a film called Fields of Gold, and it will be focusing on all these aspects of this incredible man who started with nothing, was an American dream story, connected with his community, you know, made multiple contributions on a local and national level. And I just want to also say one thing regarding Jennifer. One of the best parts about my job is every time we go through this museum with groups, when you see that light bulb go off, where people are connecting things that they already know with what you're telling them, whether it's about their local community or the way our story connects on a national level, or whatever, when the light bulbs go off, you know that people are connecting the dots and they're understanding things in a way that they hadn't before. And that's part of museum work.
Well, thank you very much. And with that, I think we couldn't ask for a better ending to that. Let's thank Laura. You are the director of the Staley Museum. Her tech assistant, Lauren Taylor, there from the Mueller Museum as well. Laura does wear both hats over the Mueller Museum and the Staley Museum, and also Jennifer Fink from Macon County. So thank you very much to all of you. We really appreciate that. I'm going to leave it on, so if you have other chat questions, that's great. So if you share soybean during another session, that's fine. My recommendations are also on the blog at www.beyondthebarndoor.wordpress.com. So we'll watch those, but thank you everyone. We really appreciate it. Give me an hour or so to get this video rendered and put up on the blog site, but teachers, don't forget to fill out your evaluation. With that, thank you. And next week, folks, it's our teacher lesson on the 14th is on apples. So we'll be heading back to school with apples. Our field trip next week is to the cornfield. We did soy today. We're going to corn next week. So next Thursday is on corn. We look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you very much, folks.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. I'm just going to turn off the recording, but watch, there'll be some chats that come up with that as well.